Welcome, everybody. Louisa Jewell here, and I'm so thrilled to have two incredible women with me today. First of all, Catherine Flavin. She's the founder and CEO of Whole Leader, and she's going to tell us more about Whole Leader. And also Maria Sirois, who is the Chief Wisdom Integrator. I love that. I love that, Maria. That's great. Okay, thank you so much for being here. Welcome. And as you know, we are hosting the inaugural Human Centered Work Summit on January 23rd. And I know the work that you're doing is so human centered. And so I wanted to ask both of you today, what does it mean for you to be human at work? And maybe you can share with us some of the approaches, some of the things you do in your work to create a more human-centered world.
Wow, is that a good big question? Louise, thank you for inviting us. Um, and thank you for smiling at Maria's title and her particular wisdom. Um, my reaction to your question is very much like my reaction when I first began in consulting to the concept of patient-centered care in healthcare. This was the late 90s. I was a fairly young associate in consulting and was at one of the big hospitals in Boston, Massachusetts, and they kept talking about rolling out a patient-centered care initiative. And I said to the chief medical officer at the time, what else would it be? Like, I
Right.
don't understand. Like, what is it? And he said, it's not, there's so many things in the way of the focus on the patient. It might be divisional issues or not really coordinating and thinking about the wrong things. And by putting the patient in the center of it,
Right.
um, healthcare has really tried to focus on what matters. And at that same kind of confusion I have, when you ask the question about what does it mean to be in human-centered work?
Yeah.
Um, I feel like it's a correction. It is the way it should be, very much like patients should be at the center of healthcare. And a lot of the ways that workplaces have gone sideways for, bureaucracy or, toxicity are different things are really not consistent with the who we are or the research. And so I think it's a little bit about getting back to what's true and trying to prevent people from having to kind of split themselves in different ways at work and outside of work.
And so how do you think we lost our way? How do you think organizations started to move away from that? What do you see?
My first thought is I'm not sure I'm old enough to say, and I feel pretty old.
Oh my gosh, yeah,
Uh,
that's not good.
I think it's a little bit like if I can go philosophical for a second, to me, it goes back to the founding of kind of Western political thinking, the separation of male and female reason and emotion. A lot of our structures were built on public-private and, male associated with reason, female associated with home and with domestic. And so we had all these large divisions that got played out in workplaces as well, so that you behaved a certain way at work and structures were set up a certain way at work. Um, and I think we're sort of realizing what parts of that worked and what parts of that didn't work. So on the whole leader side, for example, in a very practical way, um, in leadership coaching, emotion, right? John Locke and Rousseau and those guys would have said reason is above emotion. What we know from all the science now is totally not true,
Right.
right? That
Right.
like
Yeah.
David Hume was closer. It's more like an embodied sentiment. And
Yeah.
so if you don't know male or female or whatever your gender identity is, if you can't be intelligent with your emotion, you can't make a good decision.
You
So
can't, yeah, you can't even have reason without emotion, can you? Like, is
yeah,
it, you
they
really
do this weird
understand?
little dance, right? And so
Yeah.
and most of our decision making is unconscious, so we need to be mindful and careful. So I think it's a kind of learning what works in corporate, in my experience with the corporate world, it's talent, it is what people choose. There's larger social factors, there's learning and science.
Yeah.
Um, but I think people are more willing at this moment, post-COVID, um, in different places to realize they have to. Care for people has been important in the 30 years I've been in consulting, or 25 years, um, but now it's like, okay, really, you need to be smarter about this if you want to retain um,
Your
people.
your people, exactly. Maria, what are your thoughts?
So, you know my background a little bit, Louisa. I come to business from the mental health and well-being psychology world. And at some point, it's certainly here in America, I can't speak for elsewhere, there was a shift in attention from the well-being of the system to the achievement of the individual, or the achievement of a small body of human beings and their success metrics, if you will. Um, My father grew up on a farm. You can't succeed on a farm unless you're paying attention to the entire system, right? Water, rain, sun, those animals, those animals, those people, that land, and our neighbors. And as I think we moved into industrialization, I think somewhere along the line we forgot to keep our lens on the individual as well as the system. Catherine has a maxim that we live by at Whole Leader, which is it's always about you. It's never just about you. And
Yes, I love
when,
that.
yeah, when we hold on to that understanding, no matter what level of participation or leadership we are at, it forces you to consider not only what am I doing to move my own goals forward, but what am I doing to potentiate the success of those around me so that we are moving forward together.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, with well-being in mind at the same time. And I think and I think this idea of the head is more important than the heart. This reasoning is more important than emotions, I think was a predominant idea in leadership development, that we have to suppress emotions. The more stoic you can be in your approach, the better, and it became popular to actually not pay attention to people's emotions, go cry somewhere else,
Mhm.
kind of mentality. That I think that's my opinion in terms of what drives a lot of this. And I'm finding that, and thank goodness for younger generations too, because I'm finding that they're not buying into that anymore. And I think there's a new wave of people like yourselves, and for us as practitioners who've been in this field for many years, we have recognized the value of improving well-being, even from a performance level, that we know that it's good for business when people
Mhm.
are healthy and whole and bring their authentic selves to work. So what do you in your programs, what are some of the things that you suggest to leaders to be more human-centered?
Such a good question. So one of the things about Maria's role as an example where the two of us really work very, very closely together is that a question worth leading and living into? Right. So just the piece around like Peter Drucker has this thing about most leadership mistakes don't come from the wrong answer, they come from the wrong question.
Oh, that's great.
And
Yes.
so we were with a team of executives recently, and they were saying, why didn't we do X, Y, or Z? What happened there? And I was like, yeah, that question feels terrible in my body, right? So for myself, being human, it means really being like using the entirety of my wisdom when I can, the physicality, the knowing, the cognitive layering. But I was like, that question feels terrible. Can we play with this for a minute and find a better one? And they landed on a question which was if we used the lessons of the last quarter and combined it with the hope that we will achieve X, how would we move ahead?
Great
Right.
question. That's a
And
solution focused
it
question.
is, it's a very solution focused questions, but just if you're in the room, like which question do you want to answer?
Mhm.
Right. And the first question invites blame, shame, kind of dwelling in negative. And the second one is like, yes, it was difficult, right? Like we had this bad thing and we want to do better. So how could we move forward that way? So there's a fair amount of um, tactics around what questions do we live into. And on the exec development side or the senior leader development side, um, I really view this, and I'm almost embarrassed in the world of positive psych to say this, but my entry to this is less about positive psych as a well-being thing than it is as a reality check or
Hmm.
a whole system view.
Say
Because
more. Say
we have
more about
so
that.
much negative brain bias that so the
Mm,
questions we live into, right? So if you look at an org survey,
yeah,
an employee survey, what are our strengths? What are our gaps? How do we close the gaps? Two-thirds of that conversation is gap related. There is zero connection between the gaps and the assets. In executive development, what are your strengths? What are your development areas? How do we close your development areas? Like that is the dominant thinking that is so in the water that people don't even realize they're doing it. And so for all the strengths assessments that are out there, um, they really get minimum actual practical use. And if you're buying a business, you say, what are the assets of the business? What are the risks of the business? And how do we leverage the assets of the business to mitigate, de-risk, to grow? And that's really how we approach leadership development. And it means it has a beautiful alignment with this positive psych work.
yeah,
So, like we're going to ask 5 questions to everyone on your gaps around what your strengths are, um, it, to have a functional relationship on the team, but just because you have to work so much harder to understand them. And
yeah,
then the framing of how we're going to do action planning on an employee survey is extremely different because it's not just how are we going to close our gaps, but your people are very connected to your managers. How do we leverage the connection to the managers to accomplish why on the customer side?
yeah,
We if I can give you a specific
yeah.
example, Louisa, we recently had an all hands webinar for a tech company, and um, we were trying to do what we could to build cross-functional collaboration in a very high-pressured market, high-pressured environment. And instead of just saying, what have you done well lately, which is a sort of gentle, positive, psych-oriented question, we asked them to name out loud the value someone in another function provides for them, and that when they add that value, how it potentiates their movement forward. And literally, the leader on the call had tears in his eyes because the steady stream of acknowledgement of another human being's value and then connecting that value to my ability to move my work forward is exactly the conversation we want to hear. I mean, that as I was we were wrapping up, I said, this is the kind of note that someone will take home and read to their children because it's so rare in business, you know,
Yes.
because of how you show up and the value you add in this specific way. I am able to move my work and my growth forward. Thank you so much. And it's that holistic view of course, everybody, we miss targets all the time. We make mistakes. We're not perfect. We get triggered. All of that is true. But the movement forward as an individual and as a system happens when we live in that holistic lens where we acknowledge the fault lines, but double down on how we are contributing in positive ways.
And that conversation is much more informative for me as a leader when I understand the positive impact that my strengths are making on people's performance. And I mean, that's what we want. It's about the progress. It's about let's make progress and how can I be most helpful in
Mhm.
helping us all progress. in our work and be successful. And that is much more informative than telling me that I might be bad at accounting or something that I'm really never going to be good at anyway. And so I
Yeah,
think
well,
that's a
and maybe
powerful.
you don't need to be, right?
Well, exactly, exactly,
Like
exactly.
there's a couple things for me in this. Like, so when you look at leadership development and how much is enough, right? For somebody to do. A few years ago, I got asked by a young professional, how many total package awesome leaders have you ever met? Right. And I've, coached a lot of people and been involved in exposure to a lot of leaders. And I was thinking total package, right? Like different models, different who's awesome across all things. And I was like, no one, not a single one is a like complete slam dunk across every measure, whatever your leadership model is. And granted, they have certain things in common. They have phenomenal ways of bringing a vision and raising a team and multiplying and channeling. But whether they're a financial genius or a strategic genius or an operational genius, right? Like no one is all of those. Like they will have base level competency, but they will stand out in different ways. And it's really the interplay of the strengths and when people get anxious, all right. Like I really view excessive anxiety and kind of toxic narcissistic behaviors as our enemy. Right. So the anxious overachiever, what Maria says about it basically becomes very individualistic. How am I doing? What are we, like I need this. And when we say it's always about you, that's the first draft. But what Maria just demonstrated in that question of what are you other people doing to enable you and how do you reinforce that? How do you name it? Right? It's never just about you. We're in this system. And I,
Yeah,
I believe so much of our anxiety is performance reviews, feedback. It's that what the researchers call fundamental attribution error is that we give too much credit to one person and far too much blame to one person. And yes, we can be amazing and we can make massive contributions as individuals, but no one does anything of substance alone.
that's
And
right.
and we need to get better at acknowledging that. And then people will feel better and less anxious and be less crazy. I hope.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's right. And so can we talk about this for a little bit? Like Maria, for example, what are you finding that leaders are doing to themselves that is not very human centered, that's causing this kind of anxiety and stress? And how can they move towards ways of being that honor more of their humanness to help them in this endeavor to create a more humanistic work environment?
I think many leaders misunderstand the impact of the choices they have made to devote everything in one sort of singular focus. And they fail to integrate in what's happening to their bodies, what's happening to their relationships, what's happening to the team around them. One leader recently, sort of talked with me to me with pride that they launched a new marketing effort and she didn't sleep for 3 days and 3 nights, and then was shocked when I said, "And what message do you think that was providing to the young leaders on your team?"
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I can think of another leader who I had just had a conversation with in California 2 days ago, who, after his second heart attack, finally took a pause and said, wait, I've survived two major cardiac events. I should have died both times. Perhaps this is a signal to me about how I am not living a work-life balance. But it
Yeah.
took that second heart attack. So the cutoff with the body, the cutoff with the impact on others, the misunderstanding of or the total lack of knowledge about what actually moves people toward healthy, well-being, balanced life and engagement. I think all of those are factors.
Yeah.
When,
I think, yeah. Go
yeah,
ahead.
go, Lisa.
No, I think it takes confidence and courage to say, I can't stay up 3 nights in a row. I'm going to need more resources to make this happen for the deadline. Is that what people are missing, or are they or are most leaders you work with just, hey, that's just the way the world is. I got to stay up for 3 nights to do to launch this thing.
I
What are
think,
your thoughts? Like, what stops leaders from?
yeah, I think there is a terror about failure in most of us. And that unconsciousness about that terror, or that not knowing how to actually live with fear and move forward anyway, um, it is a profound barrier, a profound barrier. The flip side of that is this adoration of achievement and perfectionism,
Mm,
as if there really is a trophy that we're going to get at the end that, names us as the best chief marketing officer in the galaxy forever and ever.
right.
So I think there's a sort of over attention on both sides of that equation. Catherine,
Yeah.
you've been in business a
Yeah,
lot
you're
longer.
nodding your head, Catherine. Yeah.
Super interesting to me because I'm going to offer you two phrases that I have really worked on. And one of them is very good enough. In our firm, it's not like people, when they say don't be perfectionistic, go with good enough. And I've found, people will sort of fake nod to that, but nobody's subconscious is on board with what feels like mediocre. And so in our team, I was like, I need to see the very good enough next iteration, right? So it helps people not procrastination, right? Your fear of, to Maria's point, and Maria, I loved your use of the word terror. Hearing it come out of your mouth in that beautiful way that you have, it's like, yeah, that's actually 100% true. And in particularly in Pause Psych, we talk a lot about, you know, failure as necessary, right? Like
Right.
it's not optional. I've failed 3 times today already,
Right.
and done 3 wonderful things. So the question is, how do we relate to that, and how do we move forward? And so that very good enough is one, but the other one is this phrase: be strategically busy adding value.
Be
So
strategically busy adding value. Okay.
right. So the idea is not to be exhausted. And the research says people who look busy get rated as more important. So Mazel Tov, look busy, right? Tell everybody your calendar is full, do all of those things. But
Right.
every business leader knows that not all the same like the investments don't produce the same result. So PE people,
Yeah.
private equity leaders talk about levers of value creation.
Yeah.
There are a handful of things that you can do in your job this year that will create beyond incremental and maybe transformative value for your business. If you know what they are, and you then create a personal operating cadence that is very much like you would run your finance function, right? And you make sure that every day you chip away at that thing, you will be wildly successful. You'll be super clear on your yes, and you don't have to be exhausted. But most leaders don't know where their value really resides, and
Mm,
they mistake being busy for being
right.
important. And then the
Yes.
things that are actually important, they don't get to, right? We very consistently overestimate what we can do in a day and underestimate what we can do in a year. Um,
100%.
and so it's like, what if and this is so hard because you have to get people on a team to say, this is your zone. And this is the thing we most need you to do or deliver. And if you do that, that's enough for me.
Yeah. And
Right.
I want to talk about this, something you said, this idea of being good enough, like it's good enough. I've said to somebody the other day, oh, it wasn't my best work, and they said it was good enough. And it doesn't feel comfortable. You're right, we're always striving. No, I want it to be excellent, right? So you kind of I felt uncomfortable with that. But I think in today, with the rate of change that we're seeing with I mean, every week I think, what happened last week? I thought I was up to date, and now I feel like I'm 10 years behind again. And that seems to be happening every week. And with the rate of change, if we're
Hmm.
not moving into action with good enough, we're never going to keep ahead of this the rate of change that is happening. And I think people need to be able to move quickly and say, good enough is better, that's better than not being done, and
And if
move into action to create some learning around it. Maria, sorry, you're going to say something.
Yeah, and if I could just layer in something paradoxical here, that ironically, if you will, our capacity to move fast enough with good enough rests a little bit on our ability to provide restorative moments for ourselves.
Mm,
That
yeah.
that's
Yeah.
part of the humanity equation that we have forgotten is, um, am I going to be online for 10 hours, having conversation 10 hours a day without taking a break? And can I do that repeatedly? And is that good enough? Well, actually, the quality of our work, the quality of our engagements, and our health and well-being demands that we every now and then create these restorative spaces. They aren't built into the typical workday. We have to kind of create them within ourselves and or create them with our leader, our managers, in order to feel okay about it,
Yeah.
which is why I think in the younger generations, we're often seeing a lot of pushback. I was doing this just very quickly. I was doing a keynote at a regional hospice event last week, and the director of the event, this is a 3-day intensive annual event, her much younger assistant had texted in that morning, "I'll be available till 2:30 today." He's like, "This is our keystone moment for the entire year. We're all working longer hours just during this 4-day period. You can have 5 days off after, but what? Wait, what?" So I think there's a longing for the restoration and a confusion about what's appropriate and how to integrate it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's sorry, go ahead, Catherine. Yeah.
I was just going to say, in these examples, what's interesting is, and I'm always very cautious about generational stuff, right? Because the every generation thinks the other generation is doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And I believe more like we have a lot to learn from each other
Yeah.
and that the perspectives are different. But this generation, my daughter is 23, and she told me recently there's a clock in Times Square that somehow I've missed in Manhattan that is running down the life of the planet. And it's like a 6-year clock or something. So, there's no one more aware than a 20 something about the environmental piece and what the future is that they might have. And so, you take that lens, and then you take the lens when you guys talk about the leader who's up 3 nights in a row.
Yeah.
Um, Maria goes to, what example does that set? I go to, that person's going to derail and destroy their own career, right?
Yeah.
They will believe that they are rocking it, and their brain will completely not function, and they will have a regrettable incident or make a terrible decision. And so sustainable performance and success, like part of where this pins around to being human, is we all have limits.
Yeah.
Like we have to, a lot of the coaching we get is people who don't eat, sleep, even go to the bathroom, then they get annoyed and yell at somebody. Like the issue coaching or
Yeah.
derailment in leadership often comes from a refusal to acknowledge that you are human and have physical and cognitive limits. Um, so the sustainability of success is really what's important to me and to a lot of stockholders, right? Like, will your
Yeah.
company be around? Will your product sustain? Will your people stay?
Yeah. And I think that's a good place to kind of wrap up, because I think that we need to remind ourselves that we are human. As much as we want to say that computers are taking over, AI is taking over, to first say we are humans first, and then everything else can come into play after we take care of ourselves first. Are there any final messages that you can share, words of wisdom on how can we put our humanness first?
Louisa, for me, you have always shown a particular light in your capacity to have meaningful moments with human beings in conference settings, in lecture settings. There's always an invitation. I have found there's always an invitation from you to actually be in the present moment together and meet and greet each other as human beings. And so I do believe that that is absolutely essential to move any system forward, a family system, a country, a city, a business forward in the direction of sustainable success and well-being for all. So I want to honor that in you and know that yeah, I mean, we go to work to, you know, pay for the roof over our heads, feed our families, provide education for our children. But we also show up because there is a longing in each of us to be seen and valued and connected and feel as if our contributions are meaningful, that we're having a life and a work that matters. And
Yes.
that can't happen unless we are paying attention to each other in that generous way that you so often create for us.
And I think you do that in your work too, Maria. You allow people to be seen and valued and have greater meaning and purpose in their lives. Because what is the point of living this life if we're not happy and fulfilled, as we go through our journey?
Yeah.
Catherine, what about for you?
I so love this part of the conversation. I think that both of you are doing for each other what I wish leaders would do for more people. One
Mm.
of and as I say this, I actually feel fury about the hurt that gets done under the name of leadership development, like under the name of developing people. People mistake it as I have to see what's wrong with you and fix it. And that notion, as people come toward the end of the year, toward performance reviews or whatever is happening, it's like, no, no, that is not the work of leadership. To um, quote a poet or borrow language, it's like, the longer I live, the more I see that the work of and leadership is to mirror and magnify each other's strengths and to put them in context in a shared position. And when people feel that way, when they feel seen, right, they in their capacity as well as their deficit, right, everyone relaxes and they don't defend as much. But the mistake that we make over and over again is to not do the thing that you both just did for each other, which is to say there is a particular genius, a particular light about you. Please keep shining it in this direction. And when we do that, the leading gets a lot easier. Um,
That's a great way to end. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all the incredible work you're both doing in the world to create more humanity in the workplace. The world needs it, and I look forward to seeing all the wonderful things that you're going to continue to do in this world. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting us. Thank you
Thank
for
you, Lisa.
creating this space.